give an explanation. Whatever I wrote, I'm not going to read. I'm going to talk off the cuff. So bear with me. Hopefully it will work. I don't know. I'm kind of not sure about it. But some of the thoughts that I had before, I would, yeah, they're probably not quite accurate. So I've learned an awful lot from the 1.5 days of being in Ljubljana. So thank you very much, by the way, for inviting me. And yeah. Okay, I will explain a little bit. In 2018, I ran a session for the American College of Art Association, which was on restaging exhibition, and it coincided with the exhibition that was run by the Getty Institute at the time. With the conference was in Los Angeles, and it was by the Getty. So there was an exhibition of that was kind of a retrospective exhibition of Harald Szeemann at the time, and it was quite a large exhibition, which was afterwards a touring exhibition, and it moved from Los Angeles to Düsseldorf, and I think a couple of other places. I didn't intend to talk about it, so I'm sorry if I forget a little bit of the detail. And if anyone can help me around, that would be very helpful. Anyway, what was really interesting at the time, there were a number of things which I found really interesting about it. One of which was the fact that it was the way in which Harald Szeemann actually opened up conversations as a curator, and opened up the conversation to the public, to try and kind of rethink the artworks and rethink the curatorial approach and the exhibition as such, which was quite a different approach from what happened prior to '69. Whereby the work which was exhibited was predominantly work that was already established, work that already had some kind of value prior to being exhibited. And what was interesting from '69 onwards is to stage exhibitions where it was not necessarily clear as to whether the work did have a status or not, or did not have a status. I don't have enough the appropriate visual material, so bear with me. But for example, Harald Szeemann very often used works which were printed works. There were very often works which were kind of photographs of what otherwise previously would have been seen as kind of established works. So what was interesting was the way in which he opened up the question of what counts as an artwork. And for me, that was really, really interesting, and that was very helpful. The other thing that I thought was very interesting about his work was that, in a sense, it was the curator who held the responsibility of the kind of social and ethical responsibility, and therefore allowed the artist to sometimes ask questions which perhaps otherwise would not have been possible to ask. But by leaving the artist free to kind of put works which perhaps were problematic in some sense, and it is the curator who actually holds it, because it is the curator who is responsible to the institution, and the institution usually has some level of political responsibility. So any kind of objections or would fall onto the institution and the curator, and not on the artist. So that in itself was very helpful. What I found particularly interesting was that in the last few years of his career, from 1991, he was commissioned to host exhibitions, whereby the idea was that he would kind of capture the spirit of a country. And I thought this was really bizarre, and I was very interested to explore it further. Amongst these exhibitions was an exhibition that focused on Switzerland. which afterwards was taken to Spain as well. There was another exhibition which focused on Austria. There was another exhibition that focused on Poland, and there was an exhibition that focused on Belgium. And I thought this was very much at odds with what I was familiar with, these kind of earlier works. And I kind of wanted to explore it. And when the call for paper for Slovenia came up, I thought, it might fit in. And that's how I kind of came to it. The other reason why I kind of thought, I need to do something about Slovenia was that it was a very bizarre kind of situation whereby in about, I think it was 2008, I was approached by a student who asked me to supervise their MA dissertation. And they wanted to work about Slovenian artists in the early 20th century. And I said, I'm sorry, it's not my area of expertise. I mean, I work in contemporary art, and I really know nothing at all about Slovenia, barely know where it is on the map. So, but the student insisted, and I was asked to do it. And the student insisted that what did they say? What the student insisted was that I was not a conventional art historian, and therefore I might be able to do something to actually change a situation. I don't think I was, but I ended up supervising it. So the student I discovered much later was not somebody who was in art history at all. Their background was in strategic studies. And I was puzzled, why on earth did they want to do anything in art history? Looking at it retrospectively, I wonder if the interest arose out of some recognition that after Slovenia gained independence and joined the EU, perhaps a slightly different strategic kind of approach to the military was useful, and that perhaps bringing in culture into it might be useful. I don't know. It might be. It might not. Either way, in conversation, what came up it was that the student was familiar with various kind of television programs that probably talked about Sava and about the Slovenian artist, and that was about the level of what the student knew, because I was quite surprised the student knew nothing at all about contemporary art or about anything else. So my view of Slovenia was perhaps completely wrong, and that is kind of why I'm saying what I'm saying. So they probably saw some television program about the Slovenian Impressionists and their time, which took place in 1890 to 1920 at the National Gallery, and since then. Since today, the museum presents Iva Groha, am I correct? Whose image, yes, you can see the image. Since the museum presents Iva Groha as the most lyrical personage in the Slovenian Impressionist decade, in spite of, and they go on to say, in spite of his exceptional talent, he was not admitted to the academy in Vienna. And my student was very, very, very concerned about that. He said, we need to do something about it. What can we do? And rewrite history so that he does come up into the kind of narrative. The student may well have seen something about Manifesta Ljubljana in 21, and at least the news. He might have been familiar with it, and he might have been aware of some of the work of Irvin Group, and he might have been aware, probably was aware, that Ivan Groha, I think, comes on the 5-cent coin, something like that. So he might have been, he or she might have been aware of it. In an article titled "Back from the Future," Boris Groys argues that contemporary art is contextual. He goes on to say that knowledge about these contexts is not an external feature of the works of art, but an intrinsic dimension of the work. And he says, if the whole world were not so interested in what is going on in New York or Los Angeles, then this art would lose much of its attraction. It is possible to put it back and to say, okay, there was a time when Paris was the center, and there was a time when Munich was the center, and when Vienna was the center. And I'm not sure that today either New York or Los Angeles are still holding the same kind of position. Greuze wrote it about 15 years ago. So I'm not sure. And I think that is changing. And therefore, the entire kind of environment is changing. Having said that, I do agree with Boris Greuze's idea that art is depending on context. And that, I think, is what I would like to kind of develop a little bit further. I'm going to go further, in 1991, Harald Szeemann, the Museum of Modern Art in curator, invited Harald Szeemann to curate the international exhibition in the museum. Szeemann is best known for his 1969, which I talked about and which you saw earlier on the catalogue that was circulated, and which other people talked about as well, some of which I did understand, and some of which I didn't quite understand the presentations because they were not in a language that I understand. But what was interesting, rather than showcase already established works and canonical works, his exhibition Epicenter Ljubljana in 1997 opened up the question about the status of works of art in an exhibition, but also the status of works of art in a collection, because it was actually next to the actual permanent collection. And about the policy of post-World War II, which was predominantly to support local artists and to collect predominantly local artists. I hope I'm right about it. I tried to check, but if I'm not, do correct me afterwards. I'm more than happy to hear it. Under the policy of non-alignment, the works promoted and collected were those which were predominantly of abstract art, where the context was not necessarily visible. There were only limited opportunities, though we have heard of quite a lot of opportunities of taking words outside of the former Yugoslavia and bringing works from outside into the former Yugoslavia. But as we did here, many of them were not of the kind of works which were supposed seen to be at the top of the hierarchy, but were somewhere below that. So there were limited kind of opportunities to interact fully with the wider world. And Szeemann's exhibition made it possible to rethink the exhibition, and also the works we exhibited were works which were of international standard. I mean, in this exhibition, the artists, there were only 8 artists, and the artists that were there included Louise Bourgeois, who was very well known, and included also Mario Metz and Marisa Metz, and there were a few others, some of which Szeemann used in earlier exhibitions. Therefore, they had kind of an international presence, which therefore kind of might help to lift something that otherwise perhaps was seen as needed a lift. And the exhibition Epicenter Ljubljana was also articulated the museum's kind of ambition to become the center of Western modern and contemporary art. It exhibited the works of diverse artists such as Louise Bourgeois and Mario Metz, and also it had Szeemann, who had already quite a name and was highly acknowledged as an important curator, who presented exhibitions with without a narrative which might kind of connect them directly. This was a strategy used in order to help generate new interpretations, because what Szeemann acknowledged was that actually the different artists were not necessarily clearly connected to each other. It was not an exhibition which was thematic, which most of his exhibition sort of was. I mean, they did have a title which suggested something which is like thematic, even if the theme was very open and very fluid. But here it was clear that each of the artists was in a separate room, in a separate space, and it was clear that there was no direct narrative that is going to connect each of the artists and each of the works. Szeemann's point about it was that in so doing, he's leaving it completely open for the museum and for the artists to actually see, and for the audience to see how they want to connect it, but also to leave it open to the museum to see in which direction they want to go in the future. So, which is very typical of Szeemann, because he was always very open to keeping things very, very open. What he said about it was, he suggested that the exhibition sought to invoke a utopian hope in which highly divergent views and art forms can coexist in harmony and chaos at the same time, without trampling on any of the participants, without giving up any part of their power, personality or autonomy. The aim was to energize both the local and the international art worlds at the same time, but in so doing, opening up the future direction of the museum in the way they wish to pursue it. The other exhibition that then took place shortly afterwards was in 2000, where Ljubljana hosted Manifesto Ljubljana. This time, it hosted not only an internationally established biennial event curated by Francesco Bonami, which we heard earlier on. So quite a few of the names probably kind of came up beforehand, who curated the Venice Biennale, as we heard before, along other well-established curators such as, no, I don't have it here. I got it. No, I don't have the names of the curator. But there were other curators which we heard about before, such as Uli Bonman, but also Maria Halboja and Catherine Romberg, with well-known artists, including several local artists, such as the Irving Group, and with their work, East Art Map. I think I have... Yeah, yes, this is just kind of some information about Manifesto for anyone who's not familiar, but I think all of you are very familiar with Manifesto, so I'm not going to repeat it, but you can read it if you wish. Okay, no, I don't. Yeah, I do have it. So where is it? Oh, yes, here it is. Okay. That's the Irving Group. Whilst Epicenter, yeah, okay. Epicenter, no, have I got it? Yeah. Whilst Epicenter Ljubljana and Manifesto were exhibitions which sought to place Slovenian art in the context of Europe and the international Western art world, there were others who wanted to support also a very different identity, that of Eastern Europe, that of post-socialist countries, and that of the Balkan. Irving Project, which I showed earlier on, yeah, no, this date is, Irving's project of constructing the East Art Map sought to provide an art history for Eastern Europe after 1945 by identifying over 250 modern artists' works and projects, which had a major impact on visual art in the region. Though they did not explicitly argue for a new category with defined characteristics, the project as such, collated and grouped a specific geographical area, and as such, gave it an identity outside Western international category of contemporary art. Now, my problem is, and kind of that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier on, and I would say it again now, is how to use those categories. Because what happens the moment we have a category of Western art, I don't know, East European art or Balkan or whichever category we choose, we automatically, even if we don't intend to, tend to have an unmarked identity, very often Western art, and a marked identity under whatever category we are putting it. To what extent Western art will remain unmarked, I don't know. It may not, and that's kind of what I'm about. How are these categories establishing the context of art, and therefore, what do we think about the artworks and where we put them? Because an artwork is, or art as such, if you put art in kind of quotation marks, is already a value judgment, and it's a social value that we are put, and a cultural value that we put on top of certain works. Why do we give it to some and not to others? Why do we give a very high art value to some and not to others? And Groy's idea of context, I think, is interesting, but I think it needs to be kind of questioned a little bit more and developed a little bit more. And I'm not going to have time to do that properly, but I'm going to have possibly enough time to just raise it so that we can think about it. And that's probably about the level of it. Groys argues that anyone wishing to write about the present-day Eastern Europe must articulate the distinctive character of this category. That is, in what manner, this is a quotation, in what manner this art differs from Western counterpoint. Well, why Western? And why do we want to use these categories? And that kind of disturbs me, and I don't know whether it disturbs you as well. But I'm trying to kind of open it up a bit. He goes on to identify characteristics such as collaborative and participant art, which arose out of the communist regime. Whilst I generally agree with much of his argument that art today, and I will probably say also art in the past, which he doesn't say, depends on context, I'm not convinced that constructing a distinction by focusing on characteristics is, be they East and West or even North and South, or whichever way we want to do it, is helpful in explaining why some artworks gain higher value than others. For it invites a conclusion that there is a hierarchy in which one is prioritized over the other. And I think that this approach may be helpful politically at times, and it might be useful to some, but it misrepresents how value is constructed in the context of art. For example, according to Groys, Marxist theory, as Groys admits, was of interest to European avant-garde who aspired to turn elite art into participatory, collaborative, and communal art. I agree. On both sides of the Cold War, there was a divide, but there were aspirations to do precisely that, only they did it very differently. The idea of participatory art, the idea of collaborative art, and the idea of communal art are seen as cultural value and social value. The question is, what do we do with it and how do we handle it? But they were visible on both sides. And the moment we kind of make a distinction, I'm sorry, I thought I was well below, but I will be very quick. The moment we make a distinction, we already suggest something about it. And to the extent that either side saw the other side as being dictated by the state, and therefore not being producing the kind of artwork that needs to be valued, there was a problem. And this made it particularly difficult for the non-aligned area because they needed to remain, I don't know to what extent I'm correct, but they needed to remain okay for both sides. So it was a bit more difficult. Anyway, my point is that the category of art establishes value. I'm finishing. Whilst the category of art is not frozen or even stable, it is expected to be supported by at least art historians, if not also museums, art institutions, the art market, and the so-called informed public. Its peripheries and boundaries may well be the subject of much debate, but this is just what keeps the category of art alive and forever changing, yet holding a coveted value status. If the category itself were to depend on on different criteria, the value attached to it will be diminished. My point about it is, if we have a different category, we have, I don't know, Western, and we have, say, I don't know, Eastern art, and we have different criteria in them, then there will be no value to the kind of category of art. So I'm not arguing for the current acceptance of a canon as stable, but I am arguing that it is continuously morphing and adjusting and changing to different local and global circumstances. It thus prioritizes slightly different set of debates and slightly different context, and thus also works whose status is continuously different and justified. Szeemann, just to say that before I finish completely, yeah, when invited by the Essl Foundation, no, I'm sorry, it's not this. I'm going to go. Yeah, when invited by the Essl Foundation, which is a private museum and art collection just outside Vienna, to curate an exhibition for them, Szeemann suggested to focus on the Balkans, and that in itself was highly problematic, since historically much of the region was ruled by either of the competing sides, either the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Ottoman Empire, and whatever went between the two. And the sphere of influence, which later on became the USSR and the US, and today is different still. But Vienna was new and at the time neutral and throughout the Cold War, and it was also not a member to this day. It's not a member of NATO, though it is a member of the EU. The exhibition aimed to showcase artists under the geographical area of the disputed category of the Balkan, a term which for many brought about and raised all sorts of derogatory connotations and put together different groups of people whose history together was more often that of war and not that of peace. Not surprisingly, the exhibition was controversial, and Raluca Voinea, for example, argued that the exhibition presented the Balkan as both a place of permanent change and a place where history is suspended and is kind of eternal. In the context of Szeemann's insisting that the aim of the was to raise Western interest in the region, not by kind of exoticizing it, Voinea argues that Szeemann created a paradoxical framework of opposites such as anger and tenderness, disaster and idyll, where multilingual ethnicities and religions resided in conflict. Moreover, Voinea argues that in effort to find collective generic attributes, Szeemann ends up with a stereotypical trap of embedded which is embedded in the mythology of honey, ball, and blood is Khan. Which the Ottoman soldiers apparently encountered. Voinea can interpret the exhibition as yet another attempt to freeze the region in a historical stereotypical interpretation of the Balkan. I'm not at all sure that this is what Szeemann was trying to do. His exhibitions generally aimed to confuse the public, and in so doing, actually open up the discussion to what it is that we want to do with it. How do we want to hold this kind of disparate material in some level of harmony? So from the perspective of Voinea, it was an interpretation, and I would like to keep. I want to keep the what I'm saying very quickly. I would like to keep it open and to suggest that actually what Szeemann did was exactly what he did in other exhibitions, which is to kind of provoke, but at the same time to keep it open. And I would leave it at that. Thank you very much.